K. Judah roars against Christianity.
What I'm known for, cleaning up false doctrine. What I'm good at, cleaning up false doctrine.
He knew this would break the silence. Mel Gibson's shocking claim about Jesus' race stuns the world. December 14th, 2025. A face they never wanted you to see. Mel Gibson declares Jesus is black and sparks global uproar. When Mel Gibson finally decided to speak, it wasn't during a press junket or a carefully scripted interview. It came out the way truths often do when they've been held too long, abruptly, forcefully, and without apology. Mel Gibson starts filming The Resurrection of the Christ, casts new actor as Jesus. According to Gibson, the Western image of Jesus as pale, soft-featured, and unmistakably European is not just inaccurate, but intentionally constructed. He argues that this visual tradition wasn't born from evidence, but from power, shaped by empires that needed a savior who looked like them. What Gibson claims to have uncovered through historical texts, anthropological studies, and early iconography points to a man whose appearance would deeply unsettle modern audiences, conditioned by Renaissance paintings and Hollywood casting. Gibson insists this realization didn't come suddenly. It emerged over years of research, particularly while developing the Passion of the Christ and later, the Resurrection. He describes poring over descriptions of first-century Judea, Roman records, and genetic realities of the region. Mel Gibson speaks out for the first time. Jesus is black, and I brought proof. In his words, you don't grow up in that sun, in that geography, among those people, and come out looking like a Scandinavian monk. He points to the darker skin tones common across North Africa and the Middle East at the time, arguing that Jesus would have visually aligned far more closely with black and brown populations than with the whitewashed image preserved in churches and films. What Gibson calls proof is not a single artifact, but a convergence of evidence that has long been minimized. He references early Christian depictions predating European dominance, where Christ is portrayed with darker skin, broader features, and tightly curled hair. He also points to Roman descriptions that make no mention of Jesus standing out racially among Jewish populations, suggesting he blended in, a detail that undermines the idea of a light-skinned figure in a darker region. For Gibson, this absence is telling. Mel Gibson starts filming The Resurrection of the Christ, casts new actor as Jesus. If Jesus had looked radically different from those around him, history would have noticed. The reaction to Gibson's claim has been immediate and volatile. Some accuse him of rewriting history to provoke outrage, while others argue he is finally saying what scholars have whispered for decades. What unsettles critics most is not the claim itself, but Gibson's refusal to soften it. He doesn't frame Jesus as non-white or Middle Eastern. He uses the word black deliberately, knowing it detonates cultural anxieties. Gibson argues that the discomfort proves his point, that race has always been part of how Jesus is controlled, marketed, and made safe for dominant cultures. He goes further, suggesting that the whitening of Jesus wasn't accidental, but strategic. In Gibson's view, once Christianity became institutionalized, the image of Christ had to align with authority. A darker-skinned Jesus suffering under imperial violence would have been too close to the lived reality of the oppressed. By reshaping his face, Gibson claims, institutions reshaped the message, stripping it of its radical threat. The result was a savior who could be admired without being unsettling, worshipped without challenging existing hierarchies. What makes Gibson's statement feel especially dangerous is its timing. In a world already fractured along racial and cultural lines, reintroducing Jesus as black forces an uncomfortable reckoning. Gibson seems aware of this and unconcerned. He argues that Christianity has survived worse than discomfort, but it may not survive continued dishonesty. He insists that reclaiming the true appearance of Jesus is not about politics, but about stripping away centuries of aesthetic lies that have quietly shaped belief. There is also a deeply personal edge to Gibson's insistence. He speaks about his own estrangement from Hollywood, from institutions, and from approval itself. In many ways, he identifies with a Jesus who has been recast to be palatable, his rough edges erased. Gibson suggests that telling this truth now feels like another step into exile, but one he no longer fears. Silence, he says, has done enough damage. Religious leaders are divided. Some quietly agree with Gibson's historical assessment, while rejecting his confrontational language. Others denounce the claim as inflammatory and unnecessary, arguing that Jesus' message transcends race.
Gibson doesn't dispute that, but he counters that transcendence does not require erasure. If race doesn't matter, he says, then why did we work so hard to change it? That question lingers, uncomfortable and unanswered. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Gibson's revelation is what it implies about faith itself. If believers have accepted a false image for centuries, what else has been softened, adjusted, or concealed? Gibson isn't offering reassurance, he is offering disruption. He believes faith was never meant to be visually convenient, and that confronting a Jesus who looks different from the one hanging in churches may force believers to reconnect with the raw, dangerous heart of the message. As the backlash grows, Gibson remains unmoved. He knows the statement will be clipped, mocked, and weaponized, but he insists the conversation is overdue. In his view, the real scandal isn't saying Jesus was black, it's how violently the idea is resisted. That resistance, he suggests, reveals more about modern culture than about ancient history. In the end, Mel Gibson's declaration is not just about skin color. It is about ownership of a story that has shaped civilizations. By challenging the face of Jesus, he challenges who gets to define holiness, authority, and truth. Whether his claim is embraced or rejected, the effect is the same. The familiar image has cracked, and once that crack appears, it becomes impossible to look at the face of Christ the same way again. Matthew 2:13-14. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, and take the young child and his mother, and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night, and departed into Egypt.